Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we are speaking with Taylor Young, a guy that I've known for many, many years. Taylor is a musician, engineer, and producer based in Southern California. He's known for playing in established hardcore bands like Twitching Tongues and God's Hate. And he's also the owner and operator of the Pit Recording Studio. Specializing in all things loud and distorted, Taylor has done records for labels such as Closed Casket Activities, Triple B Records, Revelation Records, and Profound Lore, just to name a few. Taylor is someone who I've known since you were maybe just into your early 20s. Is that right?
Something like that, maybe 2009-ish.
Yeah, and is someone who really forged his own path, created his own legacy, and I feel is someone that really represents how you can be in a creative space and be dedicated to that and do it very, very well as long as you have vision and guts. So Taylor, welcome to the show.
I'm psyched to be here. Well, you're psyched to be here.
Totally. So we are in the pit, which is cool. All right, man. So I gave just a real general intro to you for the uninitiated. So, and people come from all sorts of different walks of life to this show. For the uninitiated, people who wouldn't know, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do in your day-to-day.
Day-to-day, depending on the week, is usually I wake up in the morning, I need a 2-hour rejuvenation before I hit the studio, and then have a session or a mix day, or I'm flying to a show or playing a show here or something like that. It's usually one of the two.
All right, so you live entirely off of music?
Technically, yes.
What do you mean technically?
Technically, because I play in bands, record bands, and manage bands.
Okay, so but it all is from a creative space, and everything would come through some facet of the music business.
For sure, yeah.
Okay, so let's break it down. I want to ask you kind of maybe what's an awkward question first.
Sure.
Can someone be an effective creative force and not get compromised by the need to make money?
No, because not be compromised? Yeah, probably. I feel like Converge never compromised a single thing, and they all get to do what they want.
Okay.
But at the same time, I think that it's hard to move forward without a little bit of it. It could go either way, honestly. I think that. Sorry, I'm having a brain fart here.
Well, no, it's a tough question, and to go on what you said about Converge. All right, so let's say Converge is the banner band for that, and what I'd be interested in is kind of how do you even break down what compromise is? Because
sure, it's different for everybody. Yeah,
totally. Does that mean you're writing shitty records because if you do this, it will perform better versus following what you want to do? Does it mean playing with bands you don't want to play with in a scene you don't want to? Does it mean putting your music in YouTube videos, whatever, getting ad revenue? Or does it mean playing with people in a band that you don't like, you don't respect, whatever it is? Compromise could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, that's true. It is tough. And I would say that in Twitching Tongues' career, we didn't. And that's why I think we took a back burner,
Well, Twitching Tongues is a super interesting example because it seemed like you were poised to be a next kind of thing. Before Disharmony came out, the hype around Twitching Tongues was significant. Let's actually push on that, though. So with Twitching Tongues, the first record was Sleep Therapy? Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. When you started the band, from when you started it to when you actually started to get, let's say, genuine recognition and people were actually pretty hyped on you, how long was that for?
It was probably only a year or so.
So you did well right out of the gates.
Yeah, well, comparatively to the bands we were doing before, whereas Ruckus wasn't, we were playing to 10 people sometimes, and Twitching Tongues, I think our first show had 50 people. The second show had just we didn't have a bad show until we started touring, and we played little parts of the country, and you're not gonna draw a ton in Abilene, Texas.
Right.
And then it kind of just grew from there.
Right. But Twitching Tongues was interesting because right from the beginning, there was a different sense of production value, like how you recorded, but also you did really good looking videos. You spent time in that band doing really well done stuff. And at one point, I'd only heard of Twitching Tongues kind of just like a back conversation. I got to know you a little bit, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, they're a cool band. Like I see what they're doing. But the next thing, it was like almost like in a year, suddenly you were like a notable band. So what was the shift? Like what caused that shift?
I honestly think it could be playing fests, and because that was like the beginning of YouTube kind of driving hardcore and showing everyone this crazy thing. So I would attribute some of it to that first This Is Hardcore video. Was like it went from it like we were already doing well, and we did well at the show because we were doing well, but that video doubled down on it. And I think that did it. I did that for everybody at the time. I think it did the same for Power Trip. It did the same for Backtrack. And it was actually that same year, I think, that Power Trip had an insane set at This Is Hardcore too.
That combination of like technology and where it is now, the ability to kind of leapfrog your band, leapfrog what you're doing into a new stratosphere, because people who couldn't be there could experience it.
Yeah.
And that would draw them to the band more. All right, so that changes. Twitching Tongue starts getting to a different level. What record is this on?
But it was that first video was between Sleep Therapy and In Lovers No Law, like right before we did or you know what? It was the Preacher Man 7-inch was about to come out.
Right.
Because Sleep Therapy, we sat on it for a year and a half before it came out.
So you were a distinctly different band than what was going on at the time, especially Colin's, who is Taylor's brother. Colin's vocals were like really different and really stood out. So what role in this, like, fuck it, we're just going to do whatever we want versus like, did you get pushback where you had to make a decision to like, we're just going to do whatever we want? Or were you just like, meh, doesn't matter, whatever?
The whole point was to be able to do whatever we want, just because we were doing other bands before, where it was like we were kind of trapped with other people because we'd had different singers and different bands, and then there's another driving force. So we wanted to be able to just do whatever the two of us wanted to do at any point in time. That was actually the initial idea of the band, and it definitely never changed. And I do think that's part of the failure of the band, is that we only wanted to do exactly what we wanted to do. We did a couple tours that we were like, about, and then ended up saying no to future ones because we didn't have a great time on those.
Yeah. So In Love There Is No Law comes out.
Yeah.
And that's when Twitching Tongues got on my radar as like an older guy who's like primarily listens to Youth of Today.
Sure.
I was like, damn, this band is totally, not only is this band, I understand what they're doing and they do it really well, but they're doing it in a super ballsy way, because you had that song that was about like acceptance of different identities and different kinds of love, which at the time, in the hardcore scene, I mean, thematically, I think has been part of the hardcore scene and the punk scene of like tolerance, acceptance, and all of that.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if you were maybe someone from the LGBTQ community, you might not have felt that welcome at a hardcore show.
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, for sure.
You guys put up a flag hard on that. And I remember talking, like the people that I was talking to that would be around my generation, everyone stopped and took notice of that, at least my peer group. And we're like, whoa, this band is serious. And serious in the sense of it wasn't a song that would be around traditional tropes that a band that played in the genre that you were playing and you'd expect, right? It was such a clearly articulated, very well done, I don't want to say like political statement. I think it was more of like a human statement. But it was a real moment where I think things shifted for the band. At least I know suddenly people who would never have thought about Twitching Tongues were like, damn, I'm listening to this record, and actually this record is super cool. So what changed for the band when that record came out?
That was definitely when it got the biggest explosion, I would say, but also the biggest backlash. I don't think that video or song did particularly well. It never really went over live, but then the other songs on the record did. But yeah, that was the kind of thing. I think that record came out and everyone in the band was like, I think we could be a band full time. And we did. We tried to.
So what was the backlash though that you were getting?
I mean, hate the vocals, things like that. There was a lot of people that maybe just didn't like that song in general. That was pretty much it. But that was the whole band's existence. It was just like hate the vocals.
Yeah.
Every time.
Well, it's an interesting thing to me because like I remember the first time I heard the band, I was like, oh, okay, like yeah, I get what they're doing, and like that's cool. Like this guy can actually sing. It's good. It's not for me, but it's
Right.
cool. And then I had never seen the band. I never actually only saw you guys one time, and it was in Toronto when I went. That time I saw you with I think it was Angel Dust.
Oh, okay, cool.
I was on a work trip and I'd left a meeting. I almost had to show up in my suit to be there, but
I wouldn't have been surprised.
I had to like dip into my hotel room, change, or saw you guys, and I believe it was touring on that record. And Love There's No Law. I recall at the time I was talking to a friend of mine who's like hardcore adjacent at this point, like older person, been around. And we were talking about it. I was like, "Yo, you should check out this band." And I was talking about that song specifically, and they looked up the band. It was like, the internet's a thing at this point.
Yeah.
He looks at the band and he's like, that song does not, in my mind, doesn't go with this band. I was like, listen to the record. It's a cool record. And that song was real impactful to me in a lot of ways. And it made me really feel that there was something very different about this band that went beyond the vocals and went beyond the way that you were presenting yourself. It just made me feel like you were a really serious band about doing what you felt was right for you. And you wanted other people to do that.
Pretty much.
All right. So that record happens. You start getting the backlash that, like, I don't care if your singer has a unique style or whatever it is. Your band becomes big. People are going to shit on you.
Of course.
No matter what.
And we didn't know that because we're kids,
Totally.
22-year-old kids.
But the band then becomes like a serious force to reckon with. You're headlining shows. You're doing major tours. Like, all of this stuff is happening. Tell us about the transition from that record into Disharmony. And you don't have to get into like the lineup change or anything. It's totally up to you. But I just want to understand when you said why the band failed, it's because we decided to only do what we wanted. What happened in that time frame?
I think we just didn't pay attention to what people liked about Twitching Tongues. We just wanted to write records that we wanted to write. And at the time, that was what it was. It was a riff-driven record for a band whose fans liked the vocals. And I think that it was a little disjointed to some people. I still listen to that record and I love it. But yeah, it's. I think it was just not really paying attention to why people liked us. So we just did the next thing that we felt like we were gonna do, and also, signing to Metal Blade and things like that was just things that all kind of just happened. And yeah, I think that we didn't want to do like the funky metalcore tours and things like that. So, and the label got sour on us from that too, because we said no to a tour where the label said no Metal Blade band has ever gotten an offer from them. And I was like, okay, I don't want to be first to 5 on a 6-week tour with this band. That sounds horrible. And we were actually scheduled at the time to do some of Bane's last shows and go to Japan. I'm like, those are things that I definitely want to do. So I don't know why we would jump on this. So like it seems like a posturing kind of grab, and we're just not interested in that. But we maybe to have actual longevity, we should have been.
So it brings us to an interesting part in your story, and part of the idea where it's like I'm interested in where like kind of the business side of you started to develop, because you do your chops as a kid. You play in like little hardcore bands. There is 0% on the line when you're playing in those bands. You just want to put out records, have fun. You start a band because you want to do your own thing, and that thing becomes popular, and you get to that crossroads where I don't think you realized it at the time, based on what I'm hearing, which is if we do exactly what we want, like if you don't find the balance between doing exactly what you want and also meeting the needs of like your label, the audience that you've acquired, then things can go south pretty hard. So you put out Disharmony. I remember seeing a video of you guys playing Hellfest in France in front of thousands of people.
Right. And that was right before Disharmony came out, but we played the song Disharmony for the first time
Yeah,
at
that's
that.
right.
Yeah, and that's what the video is, and that video crushed, and everybody loved the song. And then I think it wasn't until maybe the second or third single that everybody flipped.
Mhm.
People still like that song,
Mhm.
but something happened. I think just the rest of the record wasn't what, because Colin was going for big vocal stuff. Like there's a lot of new stuff, and I think maybe people weren't ready for it. It seems like it's getting the record's got like a little bit of a cultish following at this point.
Mhm.
There were also a couple crushing reviews. Like Decibel gave us like a 2 out of 10, and who's the nerdy guy on YouTube that reviews?
Oh, the guy with the glasses.
Yeah, who reviews literally everything.
Mhm.
So it was like, okay, we got crushed by the general music fan. But he did it in a way where he like brought his friend on, and they because they were gonna crush it together. And it was just like, come on, man, look, and that was, for Colin, is kind of sensitive.
Yeah.
He really took it to heart.
Yeah.
And it made being in a band being in that band difficult for him.
So at this point, the band is what you did for a living. Is that right?
I think between the studio, Nails, and Twitching Tongues, it was like that was how I survived.
Okay.
And I wasn't recording as much as I am now then, but it was scheduled perfectly between tours.
Right. So you were making a decent living off of it.
Yeah.
But if you were to lose one, like let's say you lose Twitching Tongues, that would cut into how you would be able to live, basically.
At the time, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Chris Wren, and for those who don't know, from Bridge 9, he once said to me, he didn't, I don't think he does now either, he never made his primary living off of Bridge 9. And I asked him why. I was like, why do you do Sully's and like waste all this time? And at the time I was saying it to him because I was pissed off because he wasn't focusing enough on the label. And I was like, do more for the label, like do more for our bands.
Yeah.
And Chris is kind of a interesting, he's like another dude that's been Unflappable. He looked at me and he was like, hey man, like I don't do Bridge 9. I don't draw my living from Bridge 9 because I want to do what I want with Bridge 9. And what I want to do might not be what you want me to do. And, you know, sorry about that. But basically I do Sully's, my t-shirt company, because I want to always have Bridge 9 reflect what I like and what I want to do and what I feel like doing at the time. And you can't do that anymore when that becomes your primary living. You are always at the behest of the fan base, the trends in music, this and that. He's like, I just don't want to live like that. And good on him.
And I completely agree with that.
All right, so you hit that crossroads then where you kind of get hit in the face with it and, you know, you have a challenge with the band.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're already like doing professional stuff musically.
Yeah.
From this point, I want to hear about The Pit and how what you learned in Twitching Tongues impacted how you do business as like someone who professionally records people.
Yeah, it's hard to say if they go hand in hand. I feel like, I mean, being in Twitching Tongues, being in any band will teach you how to run a business, essentially, because you're in charge of getting from A to B, and if you don't have enough money to get from A to B, it's not going to happen. If you don't have a van or access to a van, you're not going to be able to go on the road, and if you can't make money if you don't go on the road. So it's like I would say it's not so much business, but like it's logistical, where it's like, okay, well, I have to pay rent, so I have to make sure that I have enough work lined up, and it's a lot of scheduling. And then I guess there's just so many little details and semantics where it can become cumbersome if you're not doing it right. So I guess it's hard to put into words, but it's like there's a business mindset you have to have, or it's not going to work. You have to be able to negotiate. You have to know what your worth is. You have all these things. I can't. It's hard to really connect the dots because it's just been it's been a slow process. Like I'm 33, and I feel like just in the last 3 years that the studio became like the only full-time job. And I think that not touring and being available also made it so that people came to me more. But I never really turned people away, so it's hard to say.
Well, do you pick, like, was there a point where you started picking projects you wanted to do rather than just recording whoever?
Only now. It took till now to be able to kind of fill the schedule with the things that I think are cool, but also I'm doing a lot of things that I maybe would have said not been interested in when I was 25. Like I've been doing a lot of indie stuff and even some like deathcore stuff. So it's like I would say that where I'm compromising, because it was really hard for me for a long time to step outside of my taste and do things on records that other people are gonna like, even if I necessarily don't. That's the only thing that I could think of that where it's like I have to push myself aside a lot.
Well, once you get into anything, and like, no need to name names in terms of bands, but like when you commit to doing a record that you know you don't like the band, do you end up liking that record despite it, or finding things you like about it, or do you sometimes just end in being like, I still don't like that, but I know it's a good record?
I usually love it by the end still. Yeah. There's a thing I'm working on soon where it's like, well, I haven't listened to this style on purpose almost ever, but I will find the merit in it, and they came to me because they like the things I like too. So, and in the end, I definitely am like, okay, I love every aspect of this now.
Let's talk about multiple revenue streams, because right now you do the pit, and I want to talk about the history of the pit kind of in like the next section of this, but you do the pit, you still play in bands.
Yeah.
And you get some revenue from royalties and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And then you also do band management. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those are the only three things you do?
I also, I mean, the studio has like shirts and things, and then I have like a studio branded pedal coming out soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So then let's say like a last thing would be like kind of like merchandise, include the pedal being included within that. All right. So there's 4 distinct things. When did you realize that you had, well, first of all, what's the importance of having like multiple revenue streams when you are a creative and you're just living off of what you do, like artistically?
I mean, one thing, especially when you're starting, isn't gonna cut it. Like, and I honestly think it would have been easier if I lived anywhere else. But this is the highest overhead of almost any state, I think. Well, San Francisco probably has it worse, and New York City is just as bad. But so just to survive, I had to make sure that I had a kind of absurd amount of money. If I lived in the middle of the country, this would have been so much easier.
Right.
But I might not have had as much business.
Okay. And you also wouldn't have been like a destination. Who doesn't want to go to California to record a record?
Yeah.
Okay, but interesting thing though, man. Like if you think about it this way, it's like the quote unquote day job, right? It's like, hey, I love what I do at night or on the weekends or whatever. That's what I really do, but then I have a day job. So that would almost be like a traditional like revenue stream. Like you do something until you get good enough at that other thing. But like most people don't really get the chance to stop to like give up their day job.
Right.
You got to a place, it seems relatively quickly, where you were able to make music more of a thing for you, and not just playing music, but anything under that banner of the music industry. Did someone tell you about revenue streams, or did you figure it out on your own, just kind of naturally?
No, it just kind of happened. I think that, and the studio and being in bands came hand in hand, because I just wanted to be able to have control of the music I was writing. Yeah. But like Twitching Tongues would make sure that we made enough money, and then from tour 1, Nails made money. So it was like, it just, I also think I got lucky with the first few bands I recorded just immediately exploding. And that led to more work. So it was definitely an accidental snowball effect that all 3 kind of worked together. Whereas people came to me because I did the Twitching Tongues records, and then in turn it got me, rotting out in Soul Search and all this stuff that immediately was huge in California. So then bands listen to those bands and want to come to me.
Yeah. Let's talk about compromise though for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I want to tuck into that in a second. So you play predominantly in like pretty brutal bands. You play in a band that's not like a like kind of heavyish band.
I mean, I guess Twitching Tongues was the lightest one.
Right. So something that had stood out to me about Twitching Tongues is like the liberal politics. And again, not that you were like a political band, but like humanistic politics about
We
a band.
weren't not, but we weren't necessarily.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You weren't like, if I say a political band, I'm thinking of like kind of Ebullition Records,
Sure.
like, you know, people really clearly stating their politics and taking like really that becoming almost more important than the music.
Yeah.
Where Twitching Tongues, I don't know everyone in the band, but I know you and your brother, very liberal people.
Yeah.
Not afraid to say what you think. That record, at least, was very standout for me about how you positioned it. But you've also played in like brutal bands that have a lot of like insane topics about like super, super dark things.
Yeah.
And you also played in bands with like all sorts of different people, like a diversity of people. Some of them who I'd say, some of them who have different paths in life than you and I have had.
Yeah.
How do you make it work being like a very like liberal-minded kind of humanistic guy and then playing with such a diversity of people? Like, because it's not just playing the bands. It's also when you record bands, I imagine like you'd probably deal with some pretty extreme personalities.
Yeah. I would say, you know, sometimes you end up being around someone whose energy you enjoy creatively more than personally.
Yeah.
And then that happens in the studio all the time where it's, you know, somebody I maybe not going to hang out with, but, you know, they can make fucking music.
Right.
And that's cool. I wouldn't sit and record a white power band, but, you know, there are some times where people just differ,
Right.
you know, and so you kind of just have to understand that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you brought up something that is, I think, super important. Again, for the audience that might know you reputationally or never have heard of you before, aren't music fans necessarily, but are interested in the business side of it, I'm going to speak as someone who knows you. Like, I know you would never, I don't believe you would ever play with or record a band that you were like, oh no, that's like bad and I won't do that. Absolutely not. You brought up an interesting thing though, man. Like the idea of to really be an effective business person, you have to have like an open mind that people can be different with an accepted parameter of difference and be willing to be uncomfortable with that.
Right.
Was that a thing you learned or a thing that you did?
It's just a thing I did, and I think it comes from maybe, as you said before we started, that maybe I'm unflappable, where it's like I'm not like afraid to hurt anyone's feelings or be around somebody that maybe I don't get along with. So it's just kind of like, well, if it gets weird, it gets weird. And it, you know, I don't think it ever has. But I do a bit of vetting before, so I'm not going to have the worst time. I guess the only time I've had a bad time is when I get somebody that's a lot less pro than I anticipated.
Right. So it's less about, and again, within a reasonable sphere, it's less about what they believe in personally, but more about how they show up and do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mind if I step into my work a little bit on that point?
Let's hit it.
Dude, I think this idea of, I'm a pretty like very liberal guy. Grew up with my parents are both immigrants. My parents come from.
If you don't think I know that,
yeah, I know you know. I'm speaking for the audience. My parents come from an ethnically mixed marriage, so they come from like totally different parts of the world, and they got tons of heat from their families about their marriage. So I grew up like in a real liberal household, and not like annoyingly liberal, but like super, super liberal, super progressive. But one of the things my parents always raised me with the idea is like, oh, like within reason, like people can have totally different beliefs than you. It's totally cool. And you don't even need to debate them, but you can get into like a dialectic. You can talk about ideas and nobody has to win or lose, but you can be in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know Thomas from Richmond? Used to tour with Converge, little
I don't.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy.
I assume he's one of Nate's friends.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
And he runs with like that whole crew of Richmond guys.
Yeah.
Thomas is like a real old friend of mine, and we're like on different sides politically. And I love him, and he's a good guy. And if I need like life advice or to talk about something, I'll call him up. And in the business world, I don't work with just liberal people. I work with people from all sorts of different perspectives. And I'll work with people who never talk about politics, and I work with people who annoyingly talk about politics. And for me, it's about doing good work and getting there and doing the right things and not cutting people out unnecessarily. Now, of course, the caveat to that is if someone says something like crazy, like objectionable, like totally sexist, racist, homophobic, or whatever, that's a different conversation.
Right. That's not the compromise. That's not a normal compromise. That's obvious compromise.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is like money can cause people to do that, like to be in those spaces. And I don't want to be like ludicrous to think that doesn't happen. Of course that happens.
Yeah.
But just from my own perspective, something that I think is super important for business people is to really understand the importance of being able to work with all sorts of different kinds of people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you close yourself off, you're closing off money.
Totally. Like good business where you could go and do your best piece of work that you've ever had with someone who might be 5 degrees off from you, like from an idealistic point of view. The reason I'm bringing it up is twofold. One, you're just a guy that I've seen be able to walk that pretty easily and smoothly. You are unflappable. I won't tell the story about how we talked about him being unflappable, but it's a good fucking story. You're unflappable. And you're unflappable in a way that I think like Kurt Ballou is also unflappable as well. It's like just an ability to just be with different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
But the second is I think in a time politically, it's very tempting right now to like pull on our fences and cut people out if they believe things in a slightly different way. And I think it's like a caustic thing. I think it's like real dangerous. I just want to get your thoughts and not ask you to weigh in on politics, but just from a business perspective, your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's I wouldn't even say as a business thing. Sometimes it's hard to let go as just a person. Like I hired somebody who came and did some work at the house, and they showed up with their entire back window of their truck was the Blue Lives Matter, thin blue line flag, like the whole truck. And I'm just like, well, come on in, Joe.
Yeah.
And so that's when it's like, yeah, I could have said, your truck's a joke. Just, can you get the fuck out of here?
Yeah.
But there's probably a thought process behind that. Could be he could be playing the game so he doesn't get pulled over. I don't know I don't know these things. So unless it's a swastika, we're going to do our business and move on.
Yeah, man. I first of all, that's a very strong example because if someone pulled up to my house with that, I'd be like, "Oh God."
Yeah. Oh, it was
terrible.
I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach for sure, but I was like, "Well, this is what we're doing."
Yeah.
And he was not a Blue Lives Matter type of person.
Right.
Like for sure, an ex-con.
Right.
So I was like, I think he's playing the game a little bit.
Right. Like he's doing a little camouflage.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Like it's a real weird thing for me because like coming from punk and hardcore, growing up in punk and hardcore, the ideas can be so black and white, like good and bad. Like especially when we talk about the punk community, it's like, oh, we're like like we're so good, we care about each other. Everyone else is bad, and you're like, wait a second, that is not true at all.
Yeah, that's not the thought process. That's not what it should be.
Yeah, it's not the thought, and it's also not real. Like punk and hardcore has it's a pretty apt reflection of the real world, but just in a smaller space.
In a fishbowl.
Yeah, but like something that I really notice with musicians and people who make a living off like the creative space is like, hey man, if you want to be serious about this, you got to abandon some small thinking where you're like cutting people out of your lives based on a few degrees off of politics. So again, not the extreme examples, but just a few degrees off. So if you think about a studio setting, and the reason I brought up Kurt is like the two of you both are very unflappable. You're just dudes who can be in like a super awkward, weird conversation and not. It doesn't seem to bother you. You can handle it. How does that play into the creative process?
I guess, I mean, I think being Unflappable comes from there's a little bit of apathy in a way where it's like I just don't care that if we're not talking about the song or how it's going to go or details of the recording, then it's I just don't care. It's fine. And I do see that in Kurt a little bit too, where it's like, yeah, I don't care what you do at home. We're here to play guitar.
Yeah.
I guess that's part of it.
All right. So tell us about the Pit. How did the Pit start?
Pit started officially in 2011, but I was recording bands here and there before that, just taking my rig to places. I took it to people's houses. I had a practice space at downtown rehearsal, which is like there's a giant building downtown that is 4 floors of like bands from local bar rock to like Mr. Bungle and Fear Factory and shit like that. And so I had a space in there and would record bands at night sometimes. And then I had one demo do really well. And then it got a bunch of work and it just spiraled from there.
How did you get into recording? Like, well, actually, first of all, how did you even get into music, like punk and hardcore? How did you come up at all?
Both my parents are musicians. My dad had Black Sabbath tapes all the time, and my mom is like she's a pianist who is unbelievable and extremely professional. She teaches music now. And my older brother went to high school with a bunch of Connecticut hardcore dudes. And they left stuff in his car. And I already liked metal. So when a bunch of like Grimlock and All Out War CDs get left in the car and I put that on, I'm like mind blown. Because it's only the heavy parts all the time. So I fell in love with it then and already played drums a little bit. So I just kind of switched gears and got into it fully. And then nobody in my town in Connecticut really wanted to play what I wanted to play. So I started to learn guitar because I just wanted everything to be jin, jin, jin all the time. And nobody cared about that. So I picked up recording so that I could write songs by myself. And then we moved to California, and I knew even less people, and I really started to play music by myself. And then met a couple people just going to shows and from specifically CaliHardcore.com. And started a band within like 3 months of living here. Found the venues. I don't know if you remember Studio S in North Hollywood and Cobalt Cafe and stuff. Just went to shows, met people, ended up becoming friends with one of the promoters who was in a big death metal band, and I joined that band. And then never stopped. And the recording thing kept coming around because I would do demos, or for a while I was only good enough to do our like pre-production stuff. And then we would go do the record with somebody, and I wouldn't be happy with how it sounded. So I just said, well, I guess I got to get good at this so that I can be more specific and understand it. And even I'm still learning too. Like there's something new and technical that I learn every week. I essentially just learned that I have like a problem with my console and I have to go do all the stuff to fix it. I'm going to try to learn the electronics so that I can figure it out myself.
So you totally self-taught?
Yes. My dad got me started with both drums and the tech side of things because he was a tech manager for television, and he kind of just had some of the recording gear laying around, and he would show me the basics, and then I would learn it a little better than him over time.
When was the first time you charged someone who wasn't your friend?
Who wasn't my friend?
Like, and maybe, acquaintance, but I mean like your friend, where you'd be doing it like friend deal kind of thing.
It was probably 2011 or so, but even then, like the biggest records that I did between 2009 and 2011 were people I met through playing shows.
Right.
So they were all friends for a really long time. But then I think I started getting hit up by people out of town, maybe around 2012.
How did you figure out what you were going to charge?
It was really hard. I think the first 7-inch I did, I charged like $250 or something like that. But at the time, because our rent was way lower, we had 4 people living in the house. Like I didn't have a crazy overhead. I had the same car that I drove since high school. So to exist, I needed like $500. So it was really easy. So I felt weird about charging a lot. But over time, the overhead grew. So I had to start charging more.
So how have you figured out how to charge more though? Like, is there like a kind of accepted industry rate, or you just based it on what you think your value is?
It was definitely what I thought my value was. And honestly, when I went to Kurt the first time and I heard his rate, I was like, can't charge anywhere near that because he's a fucking professional.
Yeah.
And then as time went on, his rate increased too. So it was like, okay, I can balance this out a little bit because it was so. That's my only frame of reference, honestly.
It's just recording with other people and
With
hearing their
honestly,
rates.
and when I paid other people, it was like sometimes it was $150 a day, sometimes it was like $500 a song, and then it got to the point where like, okay, I can do a better job than these, so I'll charge a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about your worth, and now I'm just talking about as a person who records and produces bands. If you're thinking about your worth, has anyone ever pushed back and been like, "No, that's too much," and tried to like barter with you?
All the time.
How do you handle that?
It's tough to. Sometimes you got to just step outside the ego, and you have to kind of see how bad you need the work, or if you need to hold strong and say, "No, this is the rate." And I've done both. There's been times where it's like, all right, let's do it for this because I think this band is awesome. Or like a label's paying. Like when a label barters with me, that's when I'm like, I have no fucking, I am not going to stand for that. I'm like, no, dude, come on. I know how many records you sell. I know how record pressing works. So I guess it depends on the situation.
So there's been times I'd imagine you have to walk from projects.
It usually gets worked out. But yeah, there's a few times where I haven't gotten them because the price is too high.
Right.
And there's like, okay, like I quote them 3,000 and they're like, we're looking for something for 500. I'm like, well, there's no middle ground. But sometimes I'll come back and say, well, if you can do this and we can do it in this amount of time, then we'll make it work. And sometimes that works too. A lot of people need to feel like they're getting a deal too. Right. So sometimes it'll be like, well, I usually do this, for you, I'll do this. But it's usually within the realm of what it should cost.
All right. If you had advice for young people who want to make a living doing this specific thing, like running a studio, doing their own studio, what advice would you have from like a business perspective and like how to grow your career?
It's hard because I felt like it's really hard to plan it. Especially when you work within a certain genre. It's kind of, if it's not organic, I don't know how to do it. Like I don't think I could say you should advertise because that's the worst idea. I don't think you should cold call bands because that's the worst idea. It's a terrible look. I don't think you should make an Instagram and pay for ads and things like that. Like I think that everyone can tell when something is genuine or not. So for me, it's just, I think the only advice is to get good at it. And if you get good at it, they will come.
Okay. I dig that. Do you mind if I tell you how we've grown our business?
Hit me with it.
So I've approached Cadence like playing in a punk band.
Yeah.
And so I worked at another coaching firm before this, and before that I was a therapist. And when I started working at the coaching firm, I remember thinking it was the corniest fucking place I'd ever worked. And it was like all of these preformed courses, like off the shelf courses, and the coaching was just essentially like the courses, but in like a one-on-one conversation. And it wasn't what people wanted. Like it was sold like it was like leadership stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like this big thought out thing. But it was just like as if you, me, and Spencer sat down one day and just said, okay, how do we teach people to be better public speakers? And then we put that in like a course or coaching. But I was kind of interested in the business side because growing up in a punk scene, like you're a business person, you know, like
without even knowing it.
Totally,
Sometimes,
man.
yeah.
You do a zine.
Yeah.
You do a podcast, you do a website, you do any of these things. You're basically playing in bands, doing shows. You're basically a business person to some degree or another, especially if you're like coordinating with other people, all the stuff that you and I know.
Yeah.
When I realized that business wasn't this like terrible, like, you know, corporate thing, and it's like, it's not like just like a black and white Dead Kennedy song kind of thing where I was like, oh, like there's actually some interesting stuff there. I became really intrigued about learning how to build a business. I worked there for a while, did a bunch of stuff, and then I started Cadence. And my first thing was like, I'm never, ever going to like cold call people. I'm never going to do any of the things you just basically said. I'm like, I'm never going to do any of those things. I'm going to be undeniable, and I'm going to be so good that we get sought out. And not only do we get sought out by clients, we get sought out by people who want to work here. And that's what happened. So 5.5 years later, I started with just my cell phone and a notebook, and I was in like the worst period of my life. I was going through like a terrible life situation. I just put everything into doing this, but I only did it as a complete punk. And that might sound weird to people listening to this because like it's like, oh, well, you work in the corporate sector. It's like, yeah, but like I didn't have peers. I didn't have like my friends didn't do this kind of business.
Yeah.
Like there was no one who'd gone ahead of me. And I just did this thing, and I never, ever, ever, ever compromised on one thing until I got to a point where I had to start compromising. The best thing I ever did for the company in the early days was I brought on someone named Jerry, who's also a punk, and she's helped me learn how to compromise really well, figuring out how do we charge, how do we build business, how do we turn things down. Because like, man, we used to do work for crazy cheap, like super complex work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just hit a point where I realized I got to do this totally as myself, but I also have to start compromising. And now we're at a point because we're trying to play outside of the arena that we've been in. We're doing advertising. Now we're doing those things. But it took us 5.5 years to get there. And even with advertising, it's like we don't want to be corny. We don't want to look thirsty. Like we want to be like, we want to bring in new people. But we want to bring them in because they wouldn't have heard of us otherwise, but they think what we're doing is different and cool.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned playing, like I kind of primarily play in one space, but you also mentioned or I guess maybe at the beginning of the interview, you're starting to do different kind of stuff, like indie stuff. Mm-hmm. So are you intentionally trying to get out of that little space that you've been in, which is primarily like heavy music?
No, but I do want to be able to do other things and have it be a sound that's desired. So I'm working with shakers and tambourines and things that I've thought were terrible things, and learning a lot about keyboards and pianos and things. And it's all really from this one band that I've been recording the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of like, well, I guess I could just do some rock music if I can make it sound good, then that's cool. Mm-hmm. But I had some experience with it before. Like I got good working with like Fender Twins and things like that, and making things that I don't care about sound awesome, mm-hmm. And trying to understand what about them is awesome to other people, and just stepping outside my own personal music box. Because I have a very narrow taste.
You were the first person I ever met in the wild who liked Grimlock.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I have
Grimlock tattoo. It's my email.
When you told me you like Grimlock, I remember doing like a double take, like Grimlock?
Yeah.
And not that I hate on Grimlock at all. It's just like, it's like such a...
It's a deep cut.
It's a deep cut. And the fact that you already brought it up in the interview is like true to form, man. Like, good on you. All right, let's go back to compromise. Mm-hmm. You hit this point where I had said to you before the interview, it seems like you need to do less compromise now because you've like really established yourself. Let's talk about like different kind of compromise.
Yeah, it's a broad term.
Yeah, I want to break it down really, really, really specifically. It can be compromise can be working with someone that you think sucks. Like you personally think they suck. Like I actually don't like you, but
Yeah.
I like this project. And I'm talking about both of our worlds right now. Like I like this project, or I know I can help, or like I actually care about what happens here, or I like the other people that are associated with it.
Sure.
So it could be someone that sucks. Or you could be compromising on price. I'm doing this for less, but I'm doing it for like a bigger picture. Or it could be work that you don't particularly like doing, but you like the people that are involved. Or it could be with something that makes you uncomfortable, but you really need the money. When you were starting out, like let's say like in the first, let's say like pre-pandemic,
Okay.
just to frame it up.
That's a big chunk of time.
It's a big chunk of time, but let's talk about like what role did compromise play for you in like building up your business? But now I'm talking about the pit and management, like everything that you do now. Like what role did compromise play back then? What kind of compromise did you have to get like comfortable with? And also what wouldn't you compromise? Because I was really surprised when you and I were talking earlier and I was like, hey, it probably seems like you need to do a lot less compromise now. And you're like, oh no, man, I have to do way more.
It's hard for me to speak on it without being specific, but
out of respect to everyone, you don't want to be
right.
specific.
Well, and I wouldn't say that it's not like a personal compromise where it's like I think this sucks, but I'm doing 2 records this year that 22-year-old me would have scoffed at both of them.
Right.
And I think that it's less compromise and more just changing.
Yeah. Growth, like personal growth.
Yeah.
If I think about compromise now, because when you said that, I was kind of like, wow, that seems so weird. But then I was reflecting on it right before we started. I'm like, well, actually, I probably do more compromise now.
Yeah.
I do. And I think the way you framed it up, me 5 years ago or me 10 years ago, I was like, I would never do this.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, yeah, I can do this. And actually, I can think it's kind of cool. I also like things like advertising or these things. I'm like, there's no way I would have done that before.
Yeah. I definitely, in the last 2 years, cold called. But it wasn't like a cold call like, hey, we should meet up and discuss. It was more like in passing while in a conversation. It was like, let's just do a record. And he was like, okay. And now we've done 5.
Oh, yeah, man.
So I guess it's being able to put yourself out there more and make yourself accessible. I also didn't do advertising because I like paid Facebook advertising, but I made a studio page.
Right.
So I asked my friend what is the easiest thing I could do to just get more business. He's like, well, do you have a website? And I said, yeah. Nobody really goes to it. He said, do you have an Instagram? And I said, no. I made an Instagram, and literally within maybe 6 months, the work doubled. Mm-hmm. So I think just little things can lead to big things.
And they don't have to be huge, because again, compromise is a huge topic, but they don't have to be like horrible compromises.
Right.
But little things like, especially me, things that I worry. I'm like I don't want to say a chronic worrier, but like I never want to do something that I think is like too off of what I really believe in.
Yeah.
And in this business, I've only ever really done it once or twice. But in my life, I kind of look back and be like, oh, fuck, what did I give up to get this? And what did I do there to get that?
Yeah.
So in this business, I'm pretty tight on it. And I'd say I actually compromise way more now, but I compromise on things that I think are relatively small, and they're just more about me being uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're compromising your discomfort in something that is most likely menial.
Yeah, and will give us actually a good gain.
Yeah.
Because it's not just me; it's like now like the whole company.
So it's just putting yourself aside, and that's why I think it's less compromise and just more growth.
Yeah, and being a little like selfless, maybe a bit, and just being like, who cares if I'm uncomfortable? It's the right thing to do.
Right.
All right, man. I'm going to ask you a couple personal questions.
Mm-hmm.
Through this process, getting to where you've gone now, because you got a pretty storied career, and it might sound weird for you to actually hear it called a career. Like, are you comfortable with that term?
Yeah. 33, I feel like I've done enough stuff to not have to feel like a kid all the time.
Yeah. All right. Since I've known you, and your brother, but I'll keep it with you. There was always like you never told me about the pit when you were a kid, but as you've developed, it's almost like the pit was always there. Like you never told me you were going to do all these things, but it's almost like everything you've done, I've always kind of been like, oh yeah, like yeah, that makes sense. That makes
Right.
total sense. It seemed like there was no other path for you.
Yeah, I had backup plans, that were like, but it still in the same vein. Like I would go work in television or something because my dad worked in television for years, or find some kind of audio job in general. But no, there was nothing else I ever gave a shit about, even as far back as middle school. Yeah, I never thought about like that. I actually gave up, compromised a little bit. I gave up a really awesome job offer. That was like, I was 18 and I was giving up like $30 an hour to go do audio for television stuff, to go on tour with DSI for 3 weeks. And you know what? It ended up being really good. But then the rest of the tours that band did were really bad. But then I started hardcore bands that did better after that. Yeah, that was, my dad was not psyched on that one.
All right, so it always just seemed like a destination for you, what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of like living your path, basically.
Right.
How are you going to make this sustainable in the future?
I've thought about that a lot. I think for me, a big thing is maintaining relevancy. And there was a point where maybe around 2016, I felt like there was a drop, but I also think it was kind of a creatively bankrupt year for a lot of people. And it ended up with not a lot of bands just recording in general. To the point where I did drive for Uber for 2 weeks, just because I was like, well, I need other money to come in now. And didn't have a great time doing that. And then I got booked up really fast. So it was like almost I did it out of self-doubt, because it wasn't like the money hadn't dried up yet, but it was like I feel like I need to add to this. And then that was when I asked my friend, how do I grow? And so but I definitely think about the future, and it's like, again, it's hard for me to plan in a non-organic way, but I think that if I continue to write music that I really love, and that even if some people like it, it will keep the studio going in a sense, because I'm going to make great sounding records. And as long as my skill level and records stay up top, then I feel like I'll be able to maintain. But I also need to, as you're sitting in my very, very small studio that I've had for now 10 years or 11 years, I do need to expand to grow more. I do feel like I've capped with what I have currently, but it's hard living in the most expensive state on earth to expand from what you have.
So do you have a plan, or are you just considering it?
I have a plan in the sense that I have money saved for the first time in my adult life. But it's hard to be able to, like, okay, I'm going to pocket this much a month, because every month is different,
Right.
And that's the only thing I can do is save for now.
This goes back to something that I know played a good role for Twitching Tongues, and I think has been beneficial for you in general. The role of kind of like independent, I guess we'll call it like independent media in like punk and hardcore and metal, right? People who do zines, websites, like Instagram accounts, but also people who do video. And again, I don't want to bring names into it, but there's been an economy that started to develop around these things. So, for example, some people do podcasts and they have Patreons, and they do like relatively well. And like and then they're interviewing, let's say, like a hardcore person or a metal person or whatever, and they're getting some kind of revenue from that. There's people who do music magazines. There's people who do video websites, and they make money off of presenting bands in whatever format, but they themselves aren't the creator of the music. What do you think about that?
Not a huge fan of the monetization aspect of other people's art. But I do see the value in the promotion. But I think that there should be some kind of give back to artists,
Like a royalty almost.
beyond that. Yeah, just something, It's hard for me to say, just because I do think that those things did a lot for bands, and they do a lot for bands now. But like the smaller bands look at it as I can't wait to be on there.
Right.
And then the bigger bands are like, where the fuck is my check?
Right.
And I know that a lot of bands feel that way. And I think what makes it worse sometimes is the brush off of that. Is like there's a lot of that where it's like, I'm not making money. It's like, yeah, we know.
Right.
We know.
Can I give you an old school example?
Yeah.
So when I was a kid playing in bands, we played the original Hellfest, the one in the U.S.
Yeah.
And we were on like the DVD of it, and we were stoked. Like,
yeah.
we were like, well, like we're not really like Trustkill Records fans, but like I always have respected what Trustkill did, and Trustkill's kind of an interesting story. Like I one day I hope I'm going to interview Josh about it, because it's kind of a neat story. But I remember being on this DVD and being like partially stoked and partially conflicted. But it was like, oh, we need your pay. Like, we need to know how to pay you for this. We're like, pay us? Okay, like that's interesting. And I'm not kidding. We got a $1 check. We got a check for $1.
Oh my God.
I think Chris maybe still has it. Chris might have it framed somewhere. And we were stoked. We thought it was hilarious, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we don't know how many DVDs they made. We have no idea what they're tracking.
That had to be 100,000 copies or something at the time.
Well, especially at the time.
Yeah.
But also, like, dude, punk and hardcore people are so interesting, because it's like, depending on where you're at, it's like if you've ever ran a label, you know what the finances are and how tight things are and how little money gets made. And anyone who's run a label has had a band been like, you're ripping me off.
Oh, yeah.
But also running a label, you probably have ripped off people either intentionally or unintentionally, like especially around like the dawn of digital, like maybe your account, it's like running a record label. It's like your accounting isn't good because you're just like kids running something, right? Yeah. There probably was money on the table that you didn't give, but maybe it was like $500 or maybe it was $5,000.
But it probably just got put into the next record half the time.
Exactly, yeah. Man.
But it's like, but technically, should that band be paying for that band?
Exactly. Yeah. Especially like, let's say a band that's like your big band, should they be paying for like your
5 small 7 inches?
Yeah, like your passion project for your friend, right?
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I've been in bands where it's like we thought we were getting ripped off, and we totally embarrassingly were not getting ripped off, and also where it's like, oh no, you owe us like literally thousands of dollars.
Sir, you have not even close to recouped.
So here we are. We're talking about like, and the reason I bring it up into the punk and hardcore side of it is because it's such an interesting microcosm that I think does play out in larger economics. Who should make money on what and why?
I feel like anyone who's investing time and money should make money. But at the same time, like, if there's a specific product and the label's doing a lot and the band's doing a lot, I would understand, Well, I guess in the bigger picture, I would say the old world model of labels is so dead in the water and not necessary. Yeah. Like you see the SoundCloud people exploding and making millions without any financial help. Right. I know a few who said no to millions of dollars. They're like, why would I give up this for this? And then there's those labels still go out there and try to get little bands because the little bands don't understand the deal. You get okay, we're going to give you $30,000. You're going to get 15% royalties. and to pay back the $30,000, it's an advance on your 15%, which means you are never going to pay that off ever unless you sell 100,000 copies. And I think that's a bit of a sham, and that should go away for sure. But I'm kind of off track from the topic. But I think that anybody who is putting in work should get paid.
But it gets weird, right? Because like if you're like let's say like say the record party is, or the band is like the first party, the record label is the second party.
Yeah.
So like being a third party person, like someone who does like a magazine, or like now we're talking about like management, which I know you do, like all of this stuff.
Yeah.
When I got involved in punk and hardcore, there had been that stuff previously with like big bands like Circle Jerks and all that. But I was involved in what I think was kind of like a lull when I first got into it, and then grunge happened and all that. But like, I don't think there was like a properly big hardcore band except for Sick of It All. And I give Sick of It All like huge props for being like forerunners and how to like kind of be a professional band. But the next one, so it would be Sick of It All, Biohazard, but Biohazard kind of played in a different sphere.
Sure.
But really, the next big hardcore band, and I'm not counting stuff like AFI, which is like a wholly different.
It became pop music, yeah.
But like, Terror was the next band, right? And it's like, that's when I started hearing conversations about like managers again and like, you know, label advances and all of that. And not because of Terror, it was just a time of music, but Terror and their longevity has been an interesting one, because like, how do you make a band work with, it's a small sphere, or not just a band, like even the Pit or anything like that. It's a very small ecosystem. How do people make money? What are the different revenue streams? Like how many different merch stores do you have? How many different regions should records get released in? All of that kind of stuff. But then you've got these like third-party contributors who are like someone who does a magazine or does videos on YouTube or whatever thing, or does a podcast. Hardcore seems, from an economic point of view, to have become like actual real deal business, but nobody's quite sure about like what the rules are and what the right thing is.
That's because it's so off the grid in a way where it's like half the time the labels are doing the hardcore handshake is literally a term.
Yeah.
Because there's like the business starts out as just, okay, I don't know about this and you don't know about this, so we're just going to trust each other.
Yeah.
And then as things progress, you get more detail. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about, and without putting too much thought into it, I don't realize that I know about business. You just kind of do, because if you go on tour for 1 month-long tour, you're gonna leave knowing things like sales margins and all this kind of shit, like things that you don't even know the term for it. You're like, well, if our shirt costs $5, we need to sell it for 10, because if we don't, we can't fill the gas tank.
So like, what's a way? And I don't think that you need to have any answer for this, but just from like, you're really in the mix with it. Like, again, you play in bands, you run a studio, you do management, like you live off music. Are there ways that we can get like, kind of like to I guess like a more structured way of how business is done, an accepted way of having it done? Especially the reason I'm bringing this third party thing of it is I find it interesting, because like, can you make music? Can you make money off of other people's creation and have that be a clean and a fair thing? And I don't have a horse in the race here. Like, yeah. I think there's good arguments on either way.
I think so. Like I have no problem paying PR people. But then the magazine itself makes money elsewhere, you know? So it's like, so I pay the PR person to send out everything, and then this stuff ends up in this magazine, but this magazine's making money off ads from the label as well. So it's kind of like where it's almost just an ethical point of view, like where like it has to feel right in a way. Like there's gonna be something where it's obviously like, okay, well, I'm putting up this video of this band playing this massive show, and I'm gonna collect the YouTube streams from that. It's like, well, that's probably not ethical
Mm-hmm.
in a way, but nobody's really gonna go out and say that.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing really irks me too much that's out there.
Well, and you hit on something that I think is like kind of the key of it is like it's got to feel right.
Yeah.
Because hardcore is like so, and not that I don't want to just talk about hardcore, but I think people who would start work like walking the real business world, not real, but like the business world, the corporate world, you'd be surprised like what the differences are. So, for example, let's say a Salesforce, and it's like a huge company. It's like, well, who gets what commission? And if you partner on things, does so and so get a percentage of your commission? And like, how does that work? A lot of it is just like, does this feel right? You know, and then like there's going to be people who are more I don't want to say like more ethical because I think someone who's more focused on getting theirs isn't a bad person. I mean, if they're in an environment that stimulates bad behavior, then they'll probably act bad. But if they're in an environment that stimulates good behavior, someone could be a little bit more individualistic. It doesn't make them a good or a bad person.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But like no matter where you are, you're going to have people who are individualistic. You're going to have people who are more community-based, who are more willing to do that. And those people might give up too much or might be taken advantage of. I think for me, it's always about like business, no matter where, might have the illusion of structure. But a lot of it is still just kind of like people being like, I don't know that much about it. You don't know that much about it. It's kind of a handshake. But in the business world, it is. There are contracts, but there's a lot of just kind of like unspoken handshake agreements on things. I think the frankness of being able to talk about stuff and meet at the table and like negotiate in any situation is what I think is the most important thing. And I think coming up in punk and hardcore, there's a general learning of how to do that if you're going to be successful, no matter what.
Right. Yeah, we just took a little less money than normal for a certain show, just because we want to play the show, or like because we know the people, and we know it'll be extra good. And then for the bands I manage, like I think I've gotten paid by one of them. I've gotten paid by literally one of them 3 times, and then the other 2 I'm like waiting until I don't want to take money if there's no money on the table. So, but I think that that's an ethical thing where it's like, well, I have had managers and I've seen how it goes, so I kind of know what to expect and how I could act, but I want to get what I would have wanted out of a manager, or I want to give what I would have wanted out of a manager.
It's kind of like be the band that you wish existed when you were a kid.
Which is, I think that's the whole point of playing music.
Yeah, totally. I think if you could write a record that you yourself would have wanted to hear when you were a kid, that's like a huge gift.
Yeah.
All right, man. As we're wrapping up, I have 3 questions for you, and they're difficult questions. They're the hardest ones I'm going to ask you.
All right. They've already been broad.
All right, man. Here's the first one. I'm going to be very specific, though.
Okay.
What's one thing that you've realized about yourself as a business person that you really like? And it doesn't mean that you can't get better at it, but you're like, yeah, I'm really good at this thing.
Like as a businessman.
Yeah, as a business person. So there's 2 parts to the question. What's one thing that you say, I know I'm good at this in terms of business, and I feel really good about it? And then what's one thing you know you need to get better at, and you're working on it?
Both are still tough, yeah. I guess I'm good at finding the middle ground and still being happy with what I'm walking away with. Even if it comes from like money or just, on working on the record and things like that. And also in general kind of subconsciously understanding what I think they want out of it. So I think I have a good handle on people a lot of the time. I do think I need to be better at taking criticism. And not even criticism as like I guess it's not even a business thing. It's just like if sometimes it'll be like, well, we want to do this, and I'll think it's an attack, where it's just, well, no, we just want to do this. It's not, it has nothing to do with you. So sometimes I think I can take things too personally when it's really just about they're trying to get for a product.
Right on. Okay. Second question. This is a really hard question, man. You can change this any time you want. Even mid-sentence, you can be like, no, I don't think this is right. What are, for you, the 3 most influential in your life musically heavy hardcore bands or metal bands?
Oh, this is... I'm going to throw Grimlock in there just because we talked about it. And I know you feel the way you feel out of unfamiliarity.
I don't feel bad about Grimlock
Yeah.
at all. Grimlock was a name that I would see in zines growing up, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, like of course I think of Grimlock. I think of the Transformer Grimlock.
Which is what they're named after.
I didn't even know that.
And they had Hulk shirts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no dog in this fight against Grimlock at all.
That's just for me, and I know it's just for me. I know that other people appreciate their stuff because I have found them all. But that was the band that, like, there's this one song where I was just like, why? They can do that? You can just be heavy the whole time and it doesn't matter?
Have you met anyone from Grimlock?
I met all of them.
And how do they feel about your celebration of their band?
They love it.
Yeah.
I think I'm in the liner notes of one of their reissues or something like that. And I've been tattooed by one of them. The other one is actually, he manages one of the most famous Marvel writers of all time. That's how deep in the like nerd stuff they are. Is that the singer, who was like a muscle dude, now manages Roy Thomas, who like created Daredevil
That's amazing.
and like all this huge shit. He was actually in a photo he was in one of the last photos of Stan Lee alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for him.
But they credit it as just Roy Thomas and Stan Lee.
Uh-huh.
But there's another photo with this. It's like the same photo with the singer of Grimlock standing behind them. Anyway, I'll have to throw it to Hatebreed, because I think that was the band where it didn't matter if you liked heavy hardcore, you liked Satisfaction. If you liked Youth of Today, you liked Satisfaction.
100%.
It's just a perfect record. It's 14 songs and it fucking flies by. And then I'm gonna also throw it to this is just out of sheer volume, is All Out War, just because they have so many records, and if you like one All Out War record, there's no reason that you're not gonna like them all, because they do this one thing and they crush it every time, and they feel like they're doing the biggest thing every time, which is, I think that's just cool.
Yeah, unbelievably consistent band.
Yes.
All right, third question. This is the easiest of the 3. Where can people find you? Where can they look you up? How can they get involved with anything that you do?
I'm literally everywhere if you type in my name, from Discogs to Bandcamp to Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever. Or you can search Twitching Tongues, which is a very searchable name. Yeah, I'm out there. I try to be available everywhere so that I can be accessible, and I will try to be accessible forever.
Heck yeah. All right, man, as we're closing off, any last words, anything that you want to share?
I don't think so.
All right, man. I just want to say it's awesome seeing you grow and do all your stuff. You know, like I talk about you almost as if like I'm 900 years older than you, but like, you know, I'm in my late 40s.
Well, that's hardcore years talking, because when I'm 33, which means I'm now 55.
Right. Totally. But it's been really cool watching you go from just like meeting this youngish person who played in cool bands and did these things to go and do like legitimately cool stuff that you've gone on to do, and just stay yourself the whole time. So I'm super proud of you. It's great knowing you, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Great. Not too broad.
It was a little broad for my narrow mind.
Awesome, everyone. All right, we'll see you in the outro, and Spencer, drop the beat.
1